Um, yes, so my name is Allison Smith. I am a school-based clinician here at the Guidance Center. This is my third school year working within the Wyandotte School District. So I have facilitated groups at most of the elementary schools, but mainly at the middle school and at the high school. And over the past three school years, I've worked with hundreds of students in small group settings and have really had a chance to get to know them better and to understand their struggles. I'm also a parent of a seventh grader, so I'm in the thick of it as well. So our agenda for today is we're going to talk about what is mental health. We're going to talk about some mental health disorders. We're going to take a trip down memory lane. We're going to talk about typical brain development in between 11 to 14, and being mindful that middle school may be fifth and sixth grade. It may look like sixth, seventh, and eighth grade for your student, or just seventh and eighth. I know different school districts in the area have them broken up differently. So just a general 11 to 14-year-old, take a look at that. We're going to learn what to look out for in regards to anxiety and depression. And then we're going to discuss some tips for good mental health, not only for your students, but also for you. Okay, so first let's talk about what is mental health. Okay, so mental health is the health of your mental and emotional well-being. So we all have mental health. It includes our emotional, our psychological, our social well-being. It's how we think, it's how we feel, and how we act. It helps us determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and make healthy choices. And just like our physical health, it is important to all people at any and every age group, okay? I like to describe mental health to my students as it's part of their body, even though we can't see it, because it's kind of hard for a middle schooler or any student to really visualize what mental health looks like. So I try to explain it as it's another part of their body. So now talking about mental health disorders. So your mental health it's complex and it impacts every area of your life. This includes how you think, the way that you feel, and the way that you act. Okay, so some basic mental health disorders include bipolar, depression, anxiety, and a mental health disorder comes into play when there is a chemical imbalance within your body. Okay, it isn't something that happens overnight, and it's also something that doesn't go away overnight. The way I like to explain it, especially to the high schoolers, they seem to get this a little bit better. The middle schoolers kind of seem grossed out by this example, but I'll share it, okay? So the example is, if I were to trip and fall and break my elbow, okay? And we knew my elbow was broken because the bone was sticking out, it was bleeding, it was really gross, right? There would be multiple steps put into place to help my elbow heal. I would first probably be taken to the hospital, I hope. I would probably have x-rays. I might need pain medication for that broken elbow. I might also have to have surgery, probably need a cast or some type of sling. I may also need physical therapy. During that time, I would probably have multiple doctor's appointments to see how the elbow is doing. And then eventually, 1 to 2 to 3, 4 months later, the cast might come off, I'd be done with the PT, and my elbow would be feeling better, right? So I like to use this example as a mental health disorder is just like a broken elbow, but inside of your body, okay? It's hard to see. But if we don't treat that broken elbow and we just left it with the bone sticking out and just gushing, it would never heal. It would never heal on its own. Okay. So just as important as it is to see a doctor for this broken elbow, it's just as important to see a doctor for any mental health disorders. There are many different ways to treat and to address mental health disorders. And the message I try to share with my youth is that it also takes time, right? And it might take many different ways to help with that mental health disorder. Okay. So let's see what we've got here. All right. So now I want you guys to think about an age in a year between like 6th and 8th grade. Okay. And this is really specific to you. I want you to think about what it was like for you. I'm putting up a picture of myself in 7th grade. I'm here with a necklace on. Okay. So I want you to think about a specific year, maybe a time frame, try to revisit that. And what was that like? What were you wearing? Who were some of your friends? Okay. And once you have that image in your head, I would like for you, let's make sure I'm doing this right. Here we go. To think about some of the challenges that we had. Okay, so I'm using the time frame of growing up in middle school, in the 90s, maybe early 2000s. Some of us may have been in, the 80s or even, more recent. But some of the things that that you may have dealt with. Okay, you have 7 new classrooms. So for our district, we go from 5th grade to 6th grade. And in 6th grade, you get 7 new classrooms and 7 new teachers. So you go from being in one room, maybe 2, right? To now being in 7 rooms with 7 different teachers. Okay. Locker issues. I don't know about you guys, but my locker was always getting stuck, right? Always having to go get the janitor, going through many different locks. You're also meeting new students from different elementary schools within the district. Friends and boyfriends and girlfriends. This is the typical age that those people are the center of their world. Okay, nothing else matters during this time frame besides friends and boyfriends and girlfriends. Okay. Lunchtime, cafeteria drama was always a thing. Who to sit by. They didn't save a seat for me. I forgot my lunch. I don't have any money. Puberty and the hormones and the body changing. This is something that plays a critical role in our students' mental health in middle school. Okay. Swimming at school. I don't know if anyone had the pleasure of having to get into a bathing suit in the middle of the day and go swimming, but it was awful, not good. Sports was also something, that we considered. Playing, trying out for teams. Okay. So this is kind of just a very general overview. Again, maybe leaning more towards my experiences, and I tried to kind of, generalize what students may have experienced. So you take all of that, and we're going to take a look at what middle school students in 2022, 2023 are dealing with. Okay. So in addition to all of the normal stressors that most middle school students deal with, they're also dealing with the pandemic fallout and the social isolation that we experienced, that put a kind of a pause in the development that happens, especially in 5th, 6th, 7th grade in regards to making friends, figuring out, who you are as an individual. We also had school disruption. Some students didn't go to school at all. Some switched to virtual. Some had, a month off at random times. Learning online school, right? We very, very quickly went from being in person to suddenly being online. We experienced grief and loss, people getting sick as well, parents and grandparents losing jobs. The other thing that middle schoolers nowadays deal with, most of them who I talk with, either they have a locker, they don't have a locker, but they're also required to just carry everything. Some students are required to carry a see-through backpack. They also have added in the Chromebook. Okay, so for any parents that are on and your student has the Chromebook, that is it's just like one more thing to have to worry about, not only for your student, but for parents and grandparents and guardians, making sure it's charged at night, making sure it's not left somewhere. School safety, right? I mean, that's a major concern now that we didn't have to worry about, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Sure, incidents were happening. They weren't to the magnitude that they are now. And because of that, a lot of districts are going through the ALICE training. So having middle school, elementary and middle school and high school students actively participate in ALICE training, that has to play an impact on their general mental health. All right, so now the biggest one, I think, is cell phones and social media and the constant connection. That is something that, back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that just wasn't a thing. And that in itself, I feel like, plays a huge impact on negative mental health if it's used, extensively. So that constant connection, I've had students tell me they feel like it's a full-time job to be connected to their phone and to feel like they have to respond to their friends on social media. They have told me full-time job. They wish that their parents had waited to give them their cell phone, which I know they would never tell you directly. But they're telling me that, behind closed doors, is that they wish they would have waited to get a phone. Along with the phone and the constant communication and connection comes the 24/7 bullying that's happening now, the cyberbullying. That was not an issue 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? I mean, bullying happened, sure, but not the constant. The bullying that typically happened was at school. And then you would go home and get a little bit of a break, physically from the bullying, not emotionally. I'm sure you still thought about it, but you would at least get a break from it and go back to school again and face your bully. But now with cyberbullying, it's constant. There is no way to get around it unless you don't have a cell phone or you're not on social media. But there has been connections made to cyberbullying to increase depression and anxiety in young people. Something else that middle school students now have to partake in, well, they don't have to, but sports, right? So like back in the day, you tried out for the team and you made it or you didn't make it. You guys were somewhat decent. Now there's all of these elite teams, these travel teams that play year round. There's hockey teams and baseball and softball and basketball teams. And so for a middle schooler who hasn't played a sport before, or maybe just in the neighborhood with friends and occasionally here and there, and they decide to go out and try out for basketball for the first time in 7th grade, they're playing amongst students who may be on elite teams and have years and years of experience. And they might not even make the team because they just simply don't have that experience. That wasn't, something that we dealt with before. So again, just a little, I don't even know if I want to call it comparison, but just something to really consider, all the additional things that our students are dealing with on a pretty regular basis. Does anyone want to add anything that that you think might be relevant to what middle school students are dealing with now? You want to throw it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. Just wondering if there's anything here that I may have forgotten. So again, we're talking about what middle school looks like in 2022, 2023. And if there's anything that should be added here. I realized too, I have the mask. I mean, that whole, wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, that covering up someone's face. So that in itself created a whole entity of like stress, anxiety. It's created low self-esteem in youth because they got comfortable wearing them and not showing their face. So that in itself could be a whole nother topic. So it looks like
someone in the chat just said a rise in vaping.
Absolutely.
Starting in middle school.
Yeah, for sure. Vaping was not, it wasn't even invented, I mean, there were different types of smoking and, whether it's tobacco or marijuana that happened. But absolutely vaping, and it's happening on a really regular basis. Pretty much in every school downriver, they're having on a regular basis, students are getting caught vaping at school. Absolutely. Okay. Let's take a look at what we have next. Okay.
All right, you guys, let's get started talking about anxiety. So I always like to start by defining anxiety. What does that word mean? What is anxiety? Well, anxiety is when you have extreme fear and worry, so much that it causes changes in your behavior, sleep, eating, or mood. And this end part is kind of the key to understanding anxiety. Anxiety causes changes in your everyday life. So for example, people with anxiety can have a really tough time sleeping because their brain is going a million miles a minute and they can't really calm down. So they'll lay in bed for hours and hours having a tough time actually falling asleep. Or maybe they have a tough time with eating. People with anxiety are always on edge, and that can lead to stomach issues. It may take away their appetite, and they may not want to eat very often. So, what's the difference between being nervous and having anxiety? And this is really important for you guys to understand, because most people think anxiety is just being nervous, and that's not really the case. There's a really big difference between just being nervous and having anxiety. Let's go over it. So, being nervous is temporary. It's a temporary thing. And we all get nervous sometimes for a bunch of different reasons. So maybe you have a really big test you have to take, or you have a really big family event or a sports game. You're probably going to be really, really nervous for that. Your heart is going to be beating. You're going to feel very tense, maybe a little stressed out. You may have a tough time eating. But when that event is over, so when you take that test or you play in that game, that nervous feeling goes away. So being nervous is a temporary feeling, and we all feel it at some point in our lives, and it goes away after a little while. Anxiety is different from that. People with anxiety feel that way all the time. So think about a point in your life when you were really, really nervous. Maybe you had to make a speech, you had to present a project, you had a really big game. Imagine that feeling all the time, that feeling of nervousness. That is what it's like for people with anxiety. They always feel on edge. They always feel very nervous, and they're always worrying. Now, anxiety is a medical condition. So it's not like being nervous. It's not something that just comes and goes as it pleases. People with anxiety, it's a medical condition, and that lasts for several weeks or longer. So it lasts for a very long time. People can have anxiety for years of their life. So it doesn't just come and go, it's always there with you. So I want to go over the symptoms of anxiety. So people with anxiety, these are going to be some of the symptoms they're going to feel. So the first one, being nervous or really tense. So you're really nervous all the time, your body is always very tense, and even when things seem very calm, you still feel this way. You have feelings of danger or panic, so you feel like somebody's out to get you. You feel like you're in trouble. A rapid heart rate. So people with anxiety, they're very nervous all the time, and that's going to increase their heart rate and make them feel even worse. Increased sweating, trembling, so your hands are kind of shaking a little bit. Difficulty focusing, so you can't really focus on school, you can't focus on your homework, it's just a really tough thing to do. So insomnia. Insomnia is a condition that means you can't sleep at night. So no matter how long you lay in bed, you can't fall asleep. Or maybe digestive problems. So you get stomach aches, you're going to the bathroom more, you're not really eating, maybe you're overeating. So those are all symptoms of anxiety. And you don't have to have every single one, but most of these symptoms are going to mean that you may have anxiety. Now, there are other types of anxiety. So what I've been talking about is just general anxiety disorder. That's just a very general way of diagnosing somebody with anxiety. But there are other kinds. Another kind of anxiety is something called social anxiety. Social anxiety is a persistent fear of being watched or judged by others. So you feel like everybody is always watching you, judging you, and saying bad things about you. And that can happen anytime too. It can happen on the first day of school. It can happen in activities like sports, clubs, or even just going to the park with some friends. And it's really tough to have social anxiety because imagine being friends with a bunch of different people or trying to make friends and you constantly feel like they're judging you, they're making fun of you, or they're not really your friend. So my job is that I travel to a bunch of different schools and I teach health programs to a class full of kids. And if I had social anxiety, I wouldn't really be able to do my job because I would be standing in front of you guys, constantly feeling like you guys are watching me, you're judging me, and you're saying bad things about me. So it's really tough sometimes when people have social anxiety. It can be really difficult making friends, going to a group of people, or just trying to be in crowds in general because you constantly feel like you're being watched and you're always on the judging platform. Another type of anxiety is something called panic disorder. So panic disorder is categorized by sudden and repeated attacks of fear that last for several minutes or longer. These are called panic attacks. So people with panic disorder are going to have panic attacks sometime in their lives. Now these can be very frequent or sometimes they can be very rare. And it's a fear of disaster, a fear of losing control, even when there isn't any danger. So people who have panic disorder will suddenly feel like everything around them is falling apart. They feel like they're losing control of their lives and everything is going wrong, even if that's not the case. So I saw somebody have a panic attack one time in my life. It was my sister, back when we were really young, back when she was a teenager, we still all lived together. She had a panic attack one time. She suddenly got really, really tense. She got very pale. She was hyperventilating, and she actually even passed out. So people who have a panic attack are suddenly going to feel like everything in their life is going wrong, and they're going to feel many different symptoms. Their heart is going to be beating out of their chest. It's going to beat 1,000,000 miles a minute. They're going to get very shaky, maybe hot or cold flashes. They may feel lightheaded, and they feel like they can't breathe. They're hyperventilating. So it can be very scary to see somebody have a panic attack. But again, it's not their fault. This is a medical condition that they have no control over. So people who have panic disorder have to try and work with a therapist or a doctor to figure out what is causing their panic attacks and how to prevent them in the future. So it doesn't matter if you have social anxiety, general anxiety, or...
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video there and put the PowerPoint back up. So I like that video. And I will go ahead and share it in the chat before we end here, so that way you could even watch it with your youth if you'd like. But it just goes over the different types of anxiety, and as she mentions in the video, the difference between feeling anxious, having anxiety, and feeling nervous, right? So the nervousness helps to motivate us. We all have a level of anxiety, every single one of us. It's always there, okay? So when you get a little bit more anxious, it can help to motivate us. So this is the example she used about taking a test. For example, I was feeling anxious about tonight's webinar, not because, I'm perfectly okay doing it, but just making sure all the logistics worked out. And so those feelings helped motivate me to look over my notes again, before tonight, to be prepared, to arrive early. So those things helped motivate me. When anxiety is, kind of swings the other way and it paralyzes you instead of motivating you, you get so anxious that you cannot physically do it. Students hide in the bathroom. They have stomach aches. They don't feel well. They might have physical symptoms like throwing up. That is when, it kind of is hurting them. And we definitely will talk about what to do if that's the case. Okay. Also, I hear from a lot of students, this, they'll say, well, I have social anxiety. I get nervous around people. They'll say that, and I'll say, okay, well, you're saying two different things. Are you just feeling nervous around people, or, true social anxiety, again, is like avoiding people and crowds, feeling so unwell in those situations. It may also lead to a panic attack. I've been with multiple students who have been experiencing panic attacks, and it's a very uncomfortable situation for that student. They literally feel like they're going to die. It's an awful feeling. So that is a little bit about anxiety. We'll continue to talk about it. Okay. Before I move on to depression and kind of clarifying, digging deeper into depression, does anyone have any questions or comments about anxiety? I didn't just.
Can anxiety be more prevalent in boys versus girls, vice versa? Does that play any factors in anxiety?
Yeah, that's a good question. So girls can, most of the time in my experience and working with, middle school students over the last 3 years, girls are, in my experience, more often able to express how they're feeling. And boys sometimes, hide it. And it takes them a while when I'm working with them, to kind of really, open up and to talk about it. I think it's kind of a, just a general, overview that girls are more emotional. They can be, right? And boys, have to try to, be tough and strong. So I think that mask can sometimes, shield how boys are feeling versus girls, if that makes sense. Okay, so the term depression, I hear this a lot from the kids at school. I'm depressed, and I'll say, okay, well, tell me what that means. Do you see a doctor for your depression? Do you have a therapist? Do you take medication? And they'll say, no, I'm just sad. I'm just depressed. So we all go through times in our life that we feel sad, right? And maybe terrible things happen around us, to us, and we go through periods of feeling sad. Okay. And depression, to have a true diagnosis of depression, is when you feel sad. It kind of leaves you paralyzed, hopeless, and this occurs if it's happened for longer than 2 weeks is kind of the general thing that, clinicians look for. And also it interrupts the daily regular activities that you used to be able to do. So if you're no longer, feeling like you have the energy to take a shower, to go to school, if you come home from school and you just sleep, all afternoon and all evening. So it kind of interferes in what a typical day may have looked like. Okay. And again, depression, just like anxiety, it's a chemical imbalance that happens within our body. It's a medical thing that's happening. So that's why it's really important to seek out that medical help. All right. So if you have concerns about your child, your middle schooler, always 100%, my first suggestion is to go see a doctor, to have a physical exam on your student, have blood work taken, check the levels of their iron, of their vitamins, get a medical clearance first. I have heard, I can't even tell you how many times that a parent will get back to me and will say, well, sure enough, they were, really deficient in, A, B, and C. So those low levels of different medical things can play an impact on your mental health. So whether it's your child or if you're even thinking for yourself, like when's the last time you had a doctor's visit? Okay. Thinking about, mental health, and does it carry over in different settings? So does your child, are they able to function at school? And then they come home and they kind of fall apart, right? That's a little bit more less concerning than if they're not able to make it through the day. They're calling you, my stomach hurts, I don't feel well, I have a headache, I'm feeling really scared, I'm feeling anxious. You bring them home and it's the same, the same feeling. So that is something that a clinician, will ask and clarify. Is the behavior carrying over into different settings? Also, you want to consider your family history of mental health disorders, as they are hereditary. And if you are dealing with anxiety, your child is more likely to be dealing with anxiety as well. I would encourage you to reach out to your school social worker if you have any concerns, whether it's the social worker or the counselor. They might be able to offer different resources or referrals for your youth. I also want to try talking to your youth, sharing your concerns and just stating any obvious changes in their behavior that they've noticed. And with middle school students, with those hormones and puberty and the brain development that's happening, they can really seem all over the place, right? One day, life is grand and they love everything. The next day, they have no friends and everything's awful. And it's just like a roller coaster of emotions and feelings. So it is kind of difficult to try to, pinpoint if something's going on with your youth, because they do experience so many different waves. So something that is so critical, if you guys take away anything from tonight's webinar, this is one of the things I would like for you to take away, and that is the importance of good sleep for our middle school students. Okay. They need lots of sleep because their brain is developing so rapidly right now. Their body is growing. And when you sleep, your body rests and it recovers and it restores. And it is like the most important thing, better than any type of vitamin or anything that's on the market. It's just good, solid sleep. Okay. So this includes being mindful of what our students have in their bedrooms as far as screens and devices. cell phones. It is highly encouraged that that the phone or the TV or whatever is turned off 1 hour before you want your student to fall asleep. Okay, so if you want them to fall asleep by 10 o'clock, then the screen needs to be turned off by 9. And that is because there is a blue light that is kind of emitted from cell phones and computers and TVs. And even when we turn it off, the blue light keeps our brain active for an entire extra hour. So we might think, oh, or we may even be able to just fall, go to sleep right away, but our brain is still going very actively for an additional hour. Okay. So trying to decrease that, cell phone use right before bedtime. The other thing that's really important for good mental health maintenance is exercise and movement. There is so much to be said about the power of endorphins and those feel-good chemicals. And those happen after we increase our heart rate for at least 10 minutes. Okay. So after 10 minutes of some type of activity, the endorphins start to flow through our body. And it's like taking a feel-good pill, like a happy pill, all natural, and it stays in your system, those endorphins, for up to 12 hours. Okay. So even if, it's something that you and your student can do together, get in the habit of the routine of going for a walk, going for a bike ride, going to play basketball, whatever it might be, exercise is critical. Also staying hydrated and well balanced. Okay. I heard many years ago that a student who goes to school and throughout a school day reads and writes and types and learns and recalls, they use as much energy as someone who runs a marathon. Okay. So imagine running a marathon 5 days a week as a student. You're going to need lots of water and you're going to need really good food and sleep for your body. Okay. And also being a good role model can be really helpful for our students, especially when it comes to, our cell phone use. And that, in itself could be a whole nother parent discussion. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, so the middle school years can be compared to what I like to call cat years. Okay, so you start off with this sweet little puppy who's so sweet and loving. They want to cuddle with you. You can teach it tricks. It's just so sweet. It eats whenever you put out food, and it wants to go for walks with you, and it wants to play with you. And then enter middle school, and your sweet little puppy turns into this feral, sometimes feral cat, right? And I feel like it's a cycle. And this cat it's finicky. It doesn't know what it wants. Sometimes it will bite you, quite literally. If you try to touch it, its claws come out. It hisses. So this creature, our wonderful students kind of turn into these feral cats. Okay. But then eventually, once they are able to cycle their hormones and just kind of come into their own skin and their own person, they kind of return back to us as these sweet little puppies. So and then something else too that's really fascinating is the audio processing development that happens in middle school. It starts from birth on up, but it's not fully developed until the age of 15. Okay, so I'll say that again. Your audio processing system, the way we hear things, the way our brain processes it, and then the way we understand it, is not fully developed until 15 years old. Okay, so that's why you may have a student that you tell them to do something and they go upstairs and either they don't do it or they come back downstairs and they're like, what'd you tell me to do? Or you tell them to grab something as they're leaving out the door for school, don't forget your Chromebook, and they forget their Chromebook. They quite literally might just be hearing wah, 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 Chromebook. And so being really mindful that you may need to repeat yourself many times with your students and trying to be really patient and understanding. The way I get my middle schoolers' attention when I really want them to hear something is I will say, I have a special announcement to make. I need to tell you something really, really special. It'll kind of, get her attention. And then I'll say, go get your Chromebook. Now keep it very simple, one-liner, and then she'll, go and get her Chromebook. So just being mindful of that audio processing system is still in development. Okay. So a couple of resources. If you're sitting through this and you're like, yep, I need to go, I need to go get a checkup for my student. Again, talking about that medical clearance, go see a doctor. Of course, if you need a referral, the guidance centers is a great resource. I would also encourage that you check out your employee assistance program. If you're employed and that business or company has an HR department, you probably have an EAP program that offers free counseling. Okay, I'll say that again. Your EAP program will offer free counseling. It is for yourself and for any of your children, and insurance is not involved. It's kept confidential. It's a great resource if you have it. The Wyandotte School District, all the elementary, middle, and high school also have a program in place called Care Solace, and your school's social worker can help connect you with Care Solace if you're interested in being connected to a therapist. Okay. Just a couple of other websites and apps that might be helpful is the Bark app on your cell phone. Also, the other thing I want you guys to take away, I said the first thing was sleep. The second thing, I'm encouraging you all to watch Childhood 2.0 on YouTube. It is about an 1.5 hour documentary on cell phones and screen use and how it is negatively affecting kids' development. It is not a movie to view with your student. I would say, maybe 10th, 11th, or 12th grade and older would be appropriate to watch it. But watch it first. They talk about some adult topics, but it is excellent. I've been in the social work field for almost 20 years now, and it is one of the best documentaries that I have seen. The other thing too, if you're having any issues with your cell phone and your student, is to connect to whoever your carrier is, and they can help you put restrictions on your student's phone to turn off, the data at 9 p.m. or switch it to, emergency calls only. So kind of using those tools for you. Okay. So I'd like to open it up now for discussion if anyone has any questions or comments.
Please feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions for Allison.
Thanks very much, Allison, for the presentation tonight. I knew some of this, I learned a little bit, and the last part that you mentioned about the Childhood 2.0, you and I had talked about that about a year ago, and I agree and love that, and would encourage everyone listening to watch that video. It's very impactful.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that feedback. We are also, the Guidance Center is offering a community film series, which I'm very excited about. The first viewing is actually next week on the 8th, February 8th at Crystal Gardens. And you'll have to look at either our website or our Facebook information for the exact information. It's, I believe it starts at 6 o'clock, and it's another documentary about anxiety. And it's about an hour, maybe hour and 15 minutes long, and it's free. It is age appropriate for 10 and older, 10 and up. So I would encourage all of you to check that out. Again, that's next week. I believe it's Wednesday at 6 o'clock. I'm going to look it up real quick. One other thing too that I want to share is sometimes I know as a parent, when I hear new things and I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate it into our life, I want to present the idea that, tomorrow is February 1st. We're starting a new month. You attended today, so it might be a good time to put something new into place with your student, right? So if you want to say, I attended a webinar last night, and it's February 1st. It's a great time to start a new habit. We're going to go for a walk every day, or we're going to plan on having dinner together, or whatever the case might be. You got a good starting point for tomorrow.